think I'll start off by introducing the first speaker for today. Professor Adrian Freeman is the president of the European Board for Medical Assessors. He's also a professor of medical education at the University of Exeter Medical School, and he's also practicing general practitioner as well. So to kick things off, Adrian will tell us to us about assessments and the challenges of Tham. So over to you.
Thanks, Simon. And thank you all for turning up. You're all very experienced medical educators, so you know about the value of reinforcement. And so, Harvey, thank you for that wonderful talk this morning. I didn't know what the content of what Harvey's talk was going to be, but you're going to see some of it again now, because I want to talk about the issue of time, and also the issue of how do I... You know what hear me, can't you? Everybody hear me? Yeah, jolly good. What I don't have experience of is team-based learning, so I guess I've got to wander around the room as I talk, but my problem is that time isn't standing still. And this is a photograph of the world's first atomic clock, and the world's first atomic clock I discovered was produced in the same year as I was born. Over time, the atomic clock has become slicker, more efficient, more elegant, more effective. Unfortunately, I haven't followed that same trajectory. Now, those of you from the UK will know that we have a manpower crisis. We particularly have a manpower crisis in my speciality, which is general practice or family medicine. And as a consequence of this, it was announced this year that there will be 5 new state medical schools. So there were 5 universities that were given the opportunity to teach as a medical school. Please come in. And the successful schools, all of them, made a point of that their curriculum would be teaching general practice, and they'd be teaching general practice from day one. So the students arrive, general practice will be there. Which led me to have a question: is how long does it take to create a fully functioning and independent health practitioner? And in the UK, the shortest time to become a specialist is in general practice, and that's roughly about 11 years. So from the time you come to medical school to the time you can actually sit down as an independent GP, it's a journey of 11 years. Assuming that you're in full-time work. And over 50% of our workforce are female, even the males want to have portfolio careers, and it's a minority now that are in full-time for that whole 11 years. But the minimum time is 11 years. So let me ask you another question. Actually, no. Let me ask you this question. How many of you in this room have not got a smartphone? Okay. So how many of you use that smartphone for your work? So the date today is the 9th of November 2018. It takes 11 years to train a fully independent doctor. And when the doctors are starting now this year as GPs, when they started medical school, the iPhone hadn't come out. It didn't exist. So we've got a problem with time. And that's our problem. There's actually too much time. You're familiar with that phrase? But as Harvey's pointed out this morning, time and knowledge and technology are not your weapons. You're probably pretty shrewd with your money, and you know about this concept of compound interest. If you put the money back in and don't take it out, then actually the rate of growth of your money is exponential, and it's much better. You're probably also familiar with an author called Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. He wrote a short story as well called The Great Time Tax Experiment, but he put in this phrase that knowledge begets knowledge as money bears interest. So the growth of knowledge is exponential. And as Harvey pointed it out, we've got this graph of doubling time of knowledge, such that in less than 2 years' time, every 73 days, medical knowledge will double. It won't be replaced, there'll still be medical knowledge there, but it's going to double over that time. So if we just look at this from a knowledge perspective in terms of time, we have a traditional undergraduate medical curriculum of 2+3. which actually has its roots in the marvellous revolution that occurred in the last century, flexible, which is talking about the importance of understanding the basic sciences before you actually practice as a clinician. But this is 1910. We've got medical knowledge doubling every 73 days. How can we have a fixed syllabus with a 5-year course? And how can we have findings at the end of the 5 years when what you're testing on is knowledge that didn't exist 5 years ago? So that's my problem with assessments from a knowledge perspective. But also, we've got this exponential growth of technology. That iPhone bit, 11 years. I work with a colleague who's an emergency medicine doctor, and he bounced into the office one day and said, Adrian, it's fantastic. I've got hearing aids. I can hear. My world has changed. I said, oh, that's great, Peter. That's very good. Does that mean you've got to get an adjustment for your stethoscope or something? And he, he uses ultrasound. He sends people around the corner for scans and so forth. He's practicing at the front line. He doesn't use the stethoscope. And we've seen these sorts of headlines. You know, Apple Watch is going to develop. They'll measure your blood pressure. They're talking about diabetics being able to measure glucose on that. And, you know, how long is it going to be until I've got an ultrasound app on here and I just put that out to the patient and so forth? So, I grew up watching Star Trek. Are you familiar with Star Trek? Do you remember Star Trek? Yeah. And what the doctor had is he had a little gadget and he just waved it in front of the patient and he would tell him what the diagnosis is and what the treatments are. And maybe this isn't so far-fetched. You know, this thing is exponential. And how am I going to design my assessments around this background of exponential? And there's this other thing called artificial intelligence. And you'll see this little thing and you think, that's adorable, the funny robot can do monkey tricks. But the problem is, this axis is wrong. What it should be is this. What's happening? And that's what's happening with artificial intelligence. It is happening even now, even here. So this company has been set up, and they're stating that we believe the biological profile of the near future will be consumer-controlled, AI-powered, and owned data. It's there. You could join this group. Here in Singapore, new hospital coming up. At the new hospital, clinicians will make use of artificial intelligence to make sense of large amounts of data quickly. This will allow them to improve diagnostic accuracy and provide cheaper, better and faster care for the hospital setting. I don't know, is this hospital being built yet?
Being built.
Being built, yeah. Okay, so this is not the future, this is happening now, it's happening round the corner. And you may have seen this headline that in China they've got an artificial intelligence robot who passed their medical final. Didn't pass first time, used machine learning, went back, passed it the next time. So, dubbing of knowledge, advanced technology, artificial intelligence, and then there's these letters. I showed it to a colleague and I said, do you know what these are? He said, well, GMT, that's a gin and tonic, isn't it? What's the other one? But as you all know, this stands for adenosine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. And that means genomics. And we've already got genomics in oncology, pharmacology, rare diseases, infectious diseases. You've heard me tell the story of my colleague. The patient came with their genome profile. It's going to happen. It's going to happen very quickly. It's certainly going to happen way before 11 years. So, what's our assessment strategy going to be? We've got all these factors now which are moving very, very fast. And in the time that it takes me as a student to go on this journey of 11 years to get to the point where I'm an independent specialist functioning as a doctor, as I should be, behind me there's this great exponential thing that's going on. And I don't know where I'm going to be. And as Parveen said, we've got this. We've got physician associates. We've got pharmacists who are independent prescribers. Our physios are becoming frontline musculoskeletal clinicians. Our nurses are taking on much more of the roles of doctors, and then we've got people who haven't gone through the training program, called healthcare assistants, who are doing the work that the nurses used to do. We've got radiographers and reporting on images, we've got mental health workers at the front line of psychiatry, etc., etc., etc. So, in this system, what are we going to teach the students and how are we going to assess them? What's going to be the function of the future primary care doctor? What's our curriculum? What's our assessment strategy? Now, as part of it, we need core knowledge, we need clinical reasoning, more clinical skills, communication, definitely, team skills, yes, resilience, I'm not quite sure how you teach resilience, but we've got to put it in there somewhere, and professionalism. And we need to do that, certainly, by teaching our students how to learn. And we do that with problem-based learning, team-based learning, but we've got to use our assessments for learning, not of learning. And this is where we talk about things like programmatic assessment and progress assessment. That's what we'll pass on. Who's going to tell us all about it?
Thanks very much, Adrian. So our next speaker is Dr. Amir Sam. Amir is a consultant endocrinologist at Schmidt and Charing Cross Hospitals, and he's also a reader at Imperial College London. He's received the Imperial College President's Medal for Outstanding Contribution to Teaching Excellence and the Outstanding Teacher Trainer of the Year Award from the Health Education Northwest London. He's also the head of Curriculum and Assessment Development, as well as the head of assessment for Year 3 and Year 6. And now we're going to move a little bit to programmatic assessment. So it's over to you, Amir.
So, okay. So, I've got about 12 to 15 minutes to convince you that we should be embracing programmatic assessment, or at least elements of it in our assessments. So, imagine you're about to see a patient, okay, but you've got no paper records. The paper's missing. You ask the nurse, they say, we can't find paper records. And if you're using electronic healthcare records, the computer system is down. You still have to assess the patient, come up with a diagnosis, offer some intervention, and they might ask you something about the prognosis. By the way, I do have formal consent from this chap to show his photo and from his father, who happens to be my son. So, how comfortable are you on the left with the assessment of this patient? You need to make a decision, you need to offer an intervention, provide him with some prognosis, but you have no past medical history. You do not know what's happened to him before, in the past. You just have to ask as many questions as you can, but do a focused examination, and then come up with some sort of decision. And I would use the same analogy with our summative assessments. We take a student with no past learning history, we give them lots of questions, high quality items, psychometrically sound, and then we try to come up with some sort of intervention, remediation, and try to answer the question of what's going to happen to this student. On the other hand, if you're now provided with a growth chart of this child, you will have multiple data points here, okay, over time, showing you what's happened. Lots of different data points. The trajectory is there for you. So this is the essence of programmatic assessment. This is a longitudinal collection and collation of information to ensure that the assessment is fit for purpose. But it's essential that the assessors understand the purpose and the meaning of the information they're collecting. So if your father happens to be an endocrinologist, he understands the importance of each one of these data points, collects the data accurately, and then you can actually make sense of them. So it's going along the centile here, fine. You have positive data here, something's going on here, and then it's crossing centiles. So then you start asking the question of, do I need to intervene? What's going on here? Why is this child falling off the centile here? So the purpose of any assessment program at least is threefold. You want to facilitate learning, as Adrian said, it's assessment for learning as well as assessment of learning. You want to have robust mechanisms for making decisions, and you also want to use your assessments to evaluate and improve your curriculum. So what are these data points? You've got multiple data points, but it's important to note that there is no such thing as an ideal assessment. Okay? It just doesn't exist. Every assessment by itself is a compromise of the quality of the assessment. And that's why we need multiple data points. Now, these might be standardized assessments, the bottom 3 layers or levels of the Miller's pyramid. They are standardized. You carefully construct the content. You have an objective scoring system mechanism. You have standardized patients. You have procedures. You train your assessors. But no assessment program is complete without the non-standardized assessments, because that's the real world. The real world is not standardized. These might include your workplace-based assessment, but also you might want to assess the professional behavior of your students in the classroom. And for this to work, again, I would emphasize the assessors must fully understand and embrace the meaning and the purpose of the assessment. Each of those data points are low stakes. What does that mean? That means they have limited consequences, okay? So if you don't measure the height once, it doesn't matter. It's over time that they give you a better picture, as opposed to high-stake assessments, which have dramatic consequences. They stop you from progression. So the stakes increase along this continuum. With more data points, the stake increase. And therefore, the binary classification of formative, summative is not really helpful, because all of these data points should be formative. They should be giving information to the learner to improve their learning. So on the left is our conventional model of assessment. This is the equation. Assessment equals items, assessments 1 to n. In programmatic assessment, hopefully you're going to have an assessment where the total is more than sum of the individual components. How does that work? Here is a model proposed about 6 years ago by Case, Van Luther and colleagues. And you can see at the top, these small circles are the learning activities. Okay, so they could be learning tasks, something happening here, learning taking place. And as a byproduct of the learning tasks, you might have learning, what they call learning artifacts, or the byproducts of learning. So a report of a project, a list of the procedural skills that the learner has observed or has done. Alongside that, you also have your assessments. They've chosen the triangles to represent that this could be any level of the Miller's pyramid. But the learning and assessment should provide meaningful information for the learner to reflect and to plan their learning. And for that to happen, you need some sort of supporting activities. You need some social interaction around the reflection, and that's the supervision by a mentor, your academic tutor. But one of the paradoxes of self-directed learning is that it actually requires a lot of external direction. So to foster self-directed learning, you need this scaffolding, this social interaction around the reflection and the planning. So here is a model for programmatic assessment in a traditional university like Imperial College, which we're contemplating. So you might have sequential models. There's model A, risk specification, model B, Easter, and you might also have parallel modules happening at the same time. This could be cases, could be lifestyle medicine, could be patient experience. And you're accumulating lots of data points. So each of those triangles are a different form of assessment, a different instrument, because no one instrument is ideal. So when you meet your tutee as a mentor tutor, now you have a dashboard, a performance dashboard in front of you. I used to be a tutor at Imperial. I would meet a student and they would say, it's all fine. Neither the tutor, neither the tutee know what that means. What does it mean, it's all fine, or it's not fine? Now, in this model, the academic tutor will have this performance dashboard and they will be able to actually see what's going on in terms of the knowledge, skills, and the behaviors. So the academic tutor has the performance dashboard, discussing with the student, you're accumulating data, you will have some sort of intermediate review before final review. Remember, Adrian said even the robot needed some remediation to go back. Okay, so remediation here, where you say you've got resets in about 4 to 6 weeks, is not really remediation. I mean, no magic can happen in 4 to 8 weeks. Remediation needs to happen here when you have time and resources. So, what are all those triangles? Well, they could be short single best answers. They could be VSAs. They could be SAQs. They could be data that you accumulate from TBL. They could be patient surveys, reflective pieces, workplace-based assessments, collaborative projects, podcasts, leaflets. You may have to have summative assessments. For example, we have to rank our students for the national job allocation process, so you may not have any choice over that, but at least that's not the whole picture. annual clinical skills exam, where you ask them to take histories, examine data interpretation, and actually communicating applied basic sciences. My doctor started me on glucocorticoids. How does it work, doctor? You might ask, well, that's a lot of assessments, okay? It's a lot of assessments. Isn't that a lot of assessment burden? So in the conventional model, there is a boundary between the learning and the assessment, whereas in programmatic assessment, actually the assessment is part and parcel of the learning. If you're in a TBL session, if you're crafting your patient, if you're doing procedure, it's actually the learning process taking place. And it's not a direct boundary between the learning and the assessment taking place. You're all familiar with this phrase, assessment drives learning. Now, over time, I've learned that there are two words missing from this sentence. A lot of assessments drive undesirable learning strategies, okay? And that's for both the learner and the assessor. So the learners are focusing on the grades rather than reflecting. They're spending less time with the patient, so assessment is driving the undesirable learning strategy. And the assessors are using the supposed objective grades as an excuse for not giving any meaningful feedback. So this would be a proposed model for programmatic assessment in your clinical years. You're collecting in data over time, multiple different data points, and these could be supervised learning events, CBDs, directly observed clinical skills, directly observed procedural skills, quality improvement projects, TBLs, clinical skills exams, knowledge test. You discuss them with your tutor, you get meaningful feedback, you have an intermediate review and a final review, and all of this information is aggregated to make a robust, defensible decision. And at the heart of this is expert judgment, which we cannot shy away from. It's imperative. You can reduce subjectivity of expert judgment with training, with scoring rubrics, with performance standards, but complete objectification trivializes assessments, and that's the thing that we feel uncomfortable. But expert judgment is not a thing that we can shy away from. Assessment for learning, as Adrian said, needs to be meaningful, and is made meaningful by providing the learner with information. And that might be quantitative, what they got for their SBA, BSAs, etc., or qualitative, more importantly, narrative information that they get from their assessors. And in fact, over time, you may be able to predict the prognosis. So this is a very recent paper, November 2018, 11 assessments, and you can actually look at the gradient, the slope of this line, and identify this student who's going to have interrupted academic progress, as opposed to student one who's doing well. So in summary, I want to finish by summarizing the 6 principles, nicely summarized by Karen Hauer in a paper in Academic Medicine this year, which says basically programmatic assessment needs to be centrally coordinated and aligned with the curricular vision. It requires multiple tools and multiple data points which provide the mentor to give meaningful feedback, allow the learner to develop self-regulated learning behavior, and allow the assessors to make robust decisions. So I was in Maastricht about 2 weeks ago discussing the practicality of this with Case Van der Bluten. I got to the hotel and he sent me already an email saying the word portfolio is associated with negative connotation. How about learner chart? Because everybody understands the patient chart. You know, you go to your patient, you look at the charts, you've got some quantitative data, you've got some qualitative data, what the nurse has written, what's the pulse, what's the blood pressure, what's the temperature, and then you make a decision. And why not use the same analogy for the learners? You look at the chart, you've got quantitative, you've got qualitative data, and then you make a decision, and everyone's happy. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Amir, for a nice overview of programmatic assessment and some of the goals and purposes, and emphasizing the different components that go into a programmatic assessment. So up next, our next 3 groups of speakers will be dealing with some of the components of a program of assessment: fast keys, low-stakes assessments, high-stakes assessments. So next up will be Professor Henk Schmidt. Okay. So Henk is a professor of psychology at the Erasmus School of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Erasmus University in the Netherlands. He's also a visiting professor for LKC Medicine, and Henk's areas of interest are in learning and memory. So Henk will be speaking about low-stakes measurements of difficult to measure competencies of medical skills. So over to you, Henk.
I think I can do without a microphone. Yeah, I'm not an assessment person, to be honest. My primary interests are in learning, memory, instruction, but I was a young medical educator in 1974 in a medical school called the Maastricht University Medical School. It started its problem-based program by that time, and I spent many years in medical schools observing the assessment procedures going on. And what I noticed was that most of the assessment is really, despite of what Amir has told you, is high stakes and quite expensive. I saw the progress test developed at Maastricht University by my colleague Jerome. You needed a team of 10 teachers to prepare all the questions for the test, and then the student would be brought together a couple of times a year in a huge gymnastics room, and then they had to do these tests. I saw the Asst coming in the 70s. Teams of teachers preparing the materials, teams of judges judging the students, the use of simulated patients, expensive and high stakes. The consequences can be dramatic for students. And I also asked myself, is this now really, are the results of these measurements really representative for what students can do and should do as doctors? There is another problem that is compounded. Of course, these high-stakes measurements have to be organized in a way that the results are reliable. And that is often a problem. With Huskies, we all know that inter-rater agreements are rather low, and nevertheless we have to come up with a judgment for each of these students. So I said to myself, what do we do with other competencies of physicians that seem to be also really important in addition to their cognitive competencies? What about compassion and empathy and integrity and resilience, reliability, ability to collaborate in a team? These are very difficult to measure competencies. And how can you deal with them in a way that's nevertheless reliable? And therefore I developed this idea of low stakes, almost continuous type of assessments, much in the way that Amir was talking about the issue, because clearly Kees van der Vleuten who was very much in favor of formal assessment, high stakes assessment, came to the conclusion that that cannot be the answers to the problems that we have in medical education. Students meet many people during their training. They see their tutors, they see clinical instructors in the skills laboratory, they meet nurses in the hospital, they even meet, now and then, less and less patients during their clinical rotations. And I said to myself, why don't we ask all of these participants, all of these stakeholders, simply to judge these students whenever they meet them on constructs, on competencies like this one, these ones. And actually I put this idea into practice at a new medical school, Tham, University College of Medicine. They only had 1 year of students, and you should realize that these students are from families in which the kind of extraversion that you see in the Western world is not commonplace. These students are reserved. You cannot easily see whether they are really compassionate or emphatic or whatever. Nevertheless, we tried. We said to each other, now let's make a simple rating scale using these kinds of constructs and see whether their tutors can reliably judge these competencies. The colleagues at Qatar The colleagues had done a Delphi procedure trying to find out what really are the important, difficult to assess competencies of students, and here you see them, cognitive competencies, interpersonal competencies, work-related competencies, science professionalism. Is the student a problem solver? Is he or she creative? Is he analytical? Is he a good listener, able to collaborate with others in a team, help others, etc., etc. So there was this short reading skill, and tutors who would see these students for a couple of weeks in their tutorial groups, rated these students. And of course, these judgments are unreliable, because you only see these students in one situation, and you see them only for a very short time. But if you ask other people to do the same thing at another moment in time, in the skills laboratory, in other situations, and you collect these data over time, then it turns out that the wisdom of the crowds, the wisdom of a team of teachers, each seeing a different facet of the student, together can produce highly reliable judgments about difficult to measure competencies. For instance, the interpersonal competencies were most easily measurable, and the inter-rater agreement expressed as G, which means a generalizability coefficient, was over 0.80, which is quite high. And even the lowest one, science and professionalism, had a G of somewhat higher than 0.70. High, reliable measures only after 5 times an attempt to say something useful about these difficult to measure interpersonal, cognitive, work-related competencies and professional competencies. So this idea of programmatic assessment, and in particular the more informal, difficult to measure, very important characteristics of good doctors are quite easy to measure if you take some time, if you use many people to judge these qualities. They needed about 5 judgments in order to arrive at quite high reliabilities. This is a way to deal with these very important characteristics of physicians, and perhaps in a way it's a way to go. If you're interested in the study itself, it will be published shortly. I think I have a reference here. You see, we were with a whole team of international team of colleagues who produced this paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henk. So now moving on to the next topic, which is assessment of professionalism, which is a really important topic I think many of us have struggled with over the years, and which we all feel is a really important topic. So speaking on assessment of professionalism, we have Dr. Jo Harris. So Dr. Jo Harris is the Deputy Head of Undergraduate Medicine and Chair of the Curriculum Review at Imperial College London, where she presents the school's cases on student fitness to practice panels. She's also interested in professionalism as part of her educational doctorate, and she also has a role overseeing assessment at LKC Medicine, especially OSPEs. I know that I personally have benefited a lot from Jo's wisdom over the years as well. So I'll hand the mic over to Jo to talk about assessment of professionalism.
Thank you, Nigel. That's very kind of you. I'm very pleased to be here to be talking about this. This is something that is very difficult, I think, for us in the UK. And as we are thinking about setting our national exam, we're looking at how are we going to actually assess professionalism within a national context. And I'm not sure I've got any answers, but I'm going to talk about some of the challenges around that. So I'm not the only person. Adrian also used this picture that Parveen used earlier on. So this is actually a picture from the Tate Gallery in London called, appropriately enough, The Doctor. And if you look at this man, he's caring, he's staring at his patient, he's very smartly dressed, he's showing a lot of empathy. So this is what we might think we would like our doctors to be, our students to be in the future. But sometimes what we end up with is this. So I don't know if I need to explain to people, but certainly people from the UK will know this is Harold Shipman, exactly, very well known, probably the world's biggest serial killer, certainly the world's biggest medical serial killer. Probably murdered up to 250 of his patients in the 1990s. And this is a problem, because if most doctors are like the previous example, how are we going to find the ones that are like this? Unfortunately, this is not solitary, so there are other cases. So again, from the UK, we've got, people will know about the mid-staffs inquiry and scandal about patients who are being abused, elderly patients, the Bristol Paediatric Heart Inquiry, and just to show it's not just the UK, there is, I don't know if people have heard of this man, Joseph Michael Swango. He murdered up to 60 of his patients over a 20-year period using arsenic, which I thought was quite interesting. But, and then in Australia, we've got the class action against vaginal mesh that is now going through the courts. So there are a number of scandals that mean, and you can see here in this Daily Mail article, so in the UK, if you want to find out what the man on the street is thinking, you look at the Daily Mail. So end of the doctor knows best. So this is the feeling that actually, can people trust doctors? Probably about 30 years ago, there was very little, if any, professionalism teaching within our curricula. The bedside manner was something you were expected to pick up. But things like these scandals, the change in the way people understand knowledge has changed that. So you may be familiar with this Martin Luther King quote, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." And these scandals led to a big crisis, really, within the UK about what are we going to do about this? So this language being used in the BMJ, all changed utterly, which is actually a quote from W.B. Yeats. And really every college or group worth its salt then developed a definition of medical professionalism. So all of these came out in perhaps the late 1990s, early 2000s, with the GMC saying that this is now what we must do. We must teach our medical student professionalism to avoid the Harold Shipmans of the future. So the Cruises from Canada, Swick, Goldie, all of these very famous people who were saying professionalism must be taught. And the early ideas were, well, actually it's not hard. We'll just teach it, we'll give them some knowledge in the early years, a little bit of ethics. And then when they get on the wards, they can learn that, apply that to what they see from their consultants. But problems with that. So curricula become integrated, and role models, we know, are not always ideal as clinicians become busier. And then there's this thing that underlies or overlies everything, which you've all heard of, which is the hidden curriculum. So no matter what we're teaching our students, underneath it all, they're probably learning something different from the way things are done in the hospital. And then maybe they tell you that. They say, well, actually, you say that, but I go on the wards and it's not like that at all. My consultant does it in a completely different way. So we have those challenges. Problems with assessment. So anything we teach, we need to assess, as the previous speakers have spoken about. The trouble is those definitions that we saw earlier on are full of attitudes and values. So we have honesty and integrity, empathy, values that we would all ascribe to. But what are we looking for when we actually assess our students? We're looking for observable behaviours. We're looking at how they interact with a patient. What does that actually tell you about their honesty or integrity? Systematic review, not so long ago, found 31 separate tools to assess professionalism, which suggests maybe there isn't much agreement, but actually maybe that's a good thing, because we've been talking about needing multiple tools. a large review with a group in Ottawa looked at professionalism as a particular challenge. So it's a multi-dimensional construct, not simple generalizable statement, and needs to be looked at in context. And then, why is this important? Well, we know it's important from the work from California, from Papadakis, that I know is much quoted. So we know that doctors who are subject to malpractice cases at work were more than 3 times as likely to have displayed unprofessional behaviour at medical school. And this wasn't very severe unprofessional behaviour. Often it was lack of communication with faculty, failure to reply to emails, not turning up for sessions. So some of the behaviours maybe that you see often with your students. So how do we characterise professionalism? So, is it the being? Are we trying to make people professionals? Or is it the doing? And Hafferty spoke about this very clearly. So we're looking for doctors who are professional, or we settle for physicians who can act in a professional manner. He's the man that has really spoken most about the hidden curriculum. And then I was very interested to hear about the competencies, because there's a lot of talk about, really, is it just another competency? Can we tick it off as, yes, professional, done? And particularly Hodges again talking about the maintenance of incompetence. So for every competency you test, everything you're not testing is a potential incompetency, which I think is an interesting thought. So, and you may be familiar with this as well, that some of the students say, the fake it till you make it, and we know that that's the case, that they're not sure what they do, but they'll just do what consultant A says on a Monday and what consultant B says on a Wednesday, and we know that happens. So there's been a bit of a change in paradigm here. We're looking more at professional identity formation. So the Cruisers, originally who said we just need to teach it, are now talking about supporting the development of professional identity. And this is a real challenge, because how do we assess this? Because this is actually assessing the essence of who someone is, their personality, if we're developing this identity. So I think this is really hard. We all know Miller's pyramid, so the knows how, shows how, and does. Does, I think, is particularly hard in medical students because they're not working, they're not doing a job, so pretty much everything they're doing is really a shows how, because they're not actually doing the job. But what if we turn this on its head? So for professionalism, what you really want to look at is what people are doing. It's their activity, it's their actual observable behaviours. And this might be how you assess it. So I put some of these things up here. I know that others have already talked about it, so I didn't put portfolio, thank goodness. I'm glad I missed that out. But so feedbacks, reflective logs, multi-source feedback. Maybe I didn't put on here some team-based activities as a way of assessing professionalism. The OSCE is not great. So how professional are you with your interaction with a patient? But the idea is that it's a number of tools. So the more tools you use, the more likely you are to actually capture these things. So in summary, really, multiple data points and programmatic testing, I think, is going to be a very good way. Competency, we just need to be careful of. It's not a tick box thing, it's a discourse. It's something that we talk about in a far broader sense. Many different tools. We've got the 31 earlier on. We need to be aware of the context that professionals were taught in, and we need to be aware of the hidden curriculum. So you can never remove the hidden curriculum completely. And for example, they tried to take role models and turn them into mentors, thinking this is great, this is what we need. We then dealt with the hidden curriculum, but then that didn't work. So the students wanted to choose their own mentors. It didn't work to actually employ them through the medical school. So that can be an issue. And then my final thought really is this from Beryl Markham, who flew across the Atlantic. So if a man has any greatness in him, it comes to light not in one flamboyant hour, but in his ledger of daily work. So I'm afraid not many solutions there, and a lot of the challenges, but I think things that we need to think about as we assess professionalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. And I think it's a nice sort of segue back into programmatic assessment and looking at the ledger of his daily work. Yeah. Okay, so for the final talk of the day, we have a duet. We have Yes, we do. We have Assistant Professor Jerome Rotgans. Dr. Rotgans holds an appointment as Assistant Professor for Medical Education Research and is a lead for course evaluation here at LKC. And we also have Associate Professor Tham, who's also the Assistant Dean for Year 5 at LKC Medicine, as well as Education Director for Tham Hospital. So both Jerome and Kam will be speaking to you about OSCEs and some of the data that we have from LKC Medicine. So who would like to start? Okay.
Thank you, Nigel. Good morning. I think our talk feels a little bit more ground level, and I'm trying to link to the previous speakers. And thank you very much for a lot of the insights that you shared. And I know this sounds a little bit grandiose, but I really do think that LKC Medicine has done a pretty good job for a new medical school as far as our OSCEs are concerned. Unless our external examiners are telling us a lie. So one of the issues that I have actually relates to Joe's talk and thoughts about professionalism. And let me elaborate. So I'm going to walk through what we have conceptualized as the quality assurance matrix for our OSCE. And we do have some kind of programmatic assessment. We don't label it as such, but we have scattered throughout all the 5 years, various forms of assessments for them. We are constrained, for want of a better word, that at the end of every academic year, there is still a big bang summative exam, but throughout the year, it is a whole series of work-based assessments and both the cognitive, and we are increasingly looking at the affective, that means the attitude as well. So after that is actually what brought us to, for Nigel and me at least, to work with Jerome. And I must tell you, Jerome is one of those fascinating people who can talk about statistics and your eyes won't glaze over. So to put together an assurance matrix to make sure that we actually know what we're doing, there are the items that we need to look at, the examiners that we need to train and to provide feedback. Of course, there's the system itself, which includes SPs, the exam team, and 3 phases. Pre-OSCE, what are the things that we need to put in place, on OSCE day itself, and then post-OSCE. And today I'm going to actually concentrate, so I'm sorry, my little box has moved away. What I'm actually looking at is actually performance analysis of the items. And if I may go to the next slide. Why are we particularly interested in that? Because 2 questions came out, and they're very, very ground level, realistic questions. My current final year exams for OSCE are 10 minutes of 10 stations and 20 minutes of 2 stations. So it's a total of 12 stations, 140 minutes of testing time. As the classes get bigger, it gets expensive. So I went to Jerome and asked, can I do only 6 of the 10 minutes, and I increase my 20-minute stations to 4, because running a 20-minute station, in terms of the number of examiners, is actually not different whether it's 10 or 20 minutes. But my total testing time is the same at 140 minutes. I've cut down 2 stations. So for those of us who run OSCE, you know how much resources you save just by doing this. And the other question, the other thing that really bugs me is, and professionalism is one of those. We built communication skills and professionalism as a domain into every one of our OSCE stations, everyone. So does that mean that if a student is good in that, in the ability to communicate, in the ability to demonstrate professionalism during OSCE, this student is actually going to enjoy an unfair advantage simply because this is something that he or she is good at. It means even in the history station, he or she ends up scoring well, even though the history is really dismal, simply because he knows how to talk, or she knows how to talk nicely and behaves professionally towards the patient, the SP or the patient. So with these 2 questions, I went over to Jerome, and then of course, next slide. Jerome has some interesting ideas, and our OSCE software has got all the stuff like Cronbach's Alpha and R-square, and we've got all those things, and all those statistics look very good, but I just didn't think they quite answered the questions I have to ask. And so I'm going to hand this over to Jerome, and I hope you enjoyed this quasi-statistics talk about how he looked at our OSCE data and actually came back to me with the answers that I wanted in a very indirect manner. So please put your hands together.
Also, the key question was, is there an underlying trait at these different stations, and it's difficult to read, but here are the 5 OSCE stations where the M3 students, and there are these reoccurring measurements of, for example, general approach to patient. We have also history taking, communication, we have rapport and professionalism, and these are repeated at every OSCE station. So what we were thinking of, and what our question was, are these underlying traits that are stable? Are these characteristics, is there an underlying factor that carries across all these stations? And of course it has some significant implications. We mentioned we can cut some stations, or we could just measure it once or twice or 3 times, but not at all stations. So is there this underlying trait? And that is what we wanted to find out. We called it a communication trait. Now, to study this, you can use a very nice and elegant method. It's called structural equation modeling. More precisely, it's called the conformity factor analysis. And in psychology or education, this is a very common approach. For instance, if you want to measure intelligence, you cannot just ask how intelligent are you on a scale from 1 to 5, but you have to infer that from all kind of repeated measures at different occasions. Yeah, and then and the rules, it tells us a G coefficient that, for example, you would look at quantitative reasoning and reading and writing ability, etc. And what you can measure with all these observed indicators, you can measure something or infer something as a latent underlying factor, non-observable factor, but that would represent overall generalizability. And that idea we thought we will apply to the OSCE, to this communication factor. Is there a trait, an underlying factor that carries across all these stations? So if you're good at station 1, you're also good at station 3, station 4, etc. So we applied this structural equation modeling approach, and we have data. We have data used for our year 3 data. There were 77 students, and this is a representation of the software. This is the underlying communication factor. Now, in order to, and you see all these different parts here represent the general approach to patient information gathering, all these communications measurements. Now, in order to evaluate whether this model, this conformity model, confirms this hypothesis, you can look at certain indexes, a certain fit. And you look at a chi-square and all kind of other indexes, but it will tell you whether your data that you have fits this hypothesized model. Now you see it already in there. Unfortunately, to our big disappointment, it did not fit. Oh, it did not fit. But then we thought, maybe we are too strict here. Maybe there is no such thing like an overall communication factor. If you look at these individual stations, you could say, look, there is something like general approach to patient, rapport and professionalism. Maybe they form small subfactors. And maybe there's not such an overall thing, but let's look at these subfactors. Yeah, we really wanted to save that idea. Now, and this is a representation of that model. You see general approach to patient, rapport and professionalism, information gathering, history taking, communication, explanation, information gathering, etc. But unfortunately, this model was even worse. To our disappointment. And so there seems not to be an underlying trait factor that measures these kind of competencies or these kind of characteristics of our students. We didn't stop here. We thought, okay, it could also maybe be that the data is not that good. Maybe something is wrong. You have 77 students. Normally you need a lot of data for these models. So we tested another model, and that is the alternative to this, is to say, look, you can also treat, with the same logic of structural equation modeling, you can treat an OSCE station or the OSCE stations as an underlying factor. So, for example, the skill stations to measure underlying abilities in terms of these skills for that station. And that would mean, if this would be a good model fit, that it is not a trait that carries across the stations, but it is the stations are very much content specific. Now, and we did that initially for each station. You can do this. There's a very good model, there's almost 100% of a fitting model, but you can also, there's a little bit more elegant, you do the one model where all these stations are represented, the history taking station, the skill station, another history station, a communication station, and a general approach to patient station. And if you look at this model, it fitted the data very well. Now, and that is a beautiful support for the idea that these stations, unfortunately, measure very specific, very content-specific skills or behaviors rather than an underlying, strong factor. Now, I handed the final thoughts over to you, since you're the clinician.
Actually, I should share this and get maybe Nigel to share his thoughts, because it's really the two of us wondering, for the OSCE that all our external examiners are telling us that we're doing very well. Is it really just because we paid our external examiners very well and that's why we have to write a nice report? Or there's actually some evidence that we are doing the right thing. So
thanks so much for coming in. I think when Jerome and I and company had this discussion as well, I think it was a useful conceptual validation of the fact that we do have evidence of content specificity for each of the individual stations, which means those two stations, which are assessing communications, for example, are meaningfully different. Counseling someone about the newly diagnosed diabetes, for example, is a very different station. It assesses a different skill from counseling someone who has, say, for example, just been diagnosed with terminal disease. Both are ostensibly the same domain of communications, but there's an element of difference in the way we test them, and therefore skill that's useful in counseling someone who's newly diagnosed diabetes is not directly transplantable to counseling someone who has just been diagnosed with terminal illness. So it kind of validates our approach in that sense, and it's supported by some of the literature that shows that there is context and content specificity. How to counsel someone as a neurologist about stroke in the outpatient clinic is again very different from how I counsel someone for thrombolysis or stroke in an emergency setting. Same disease, different setting, but again the skills are quite different. Thanks very much, Jerome and Camille. So I think our 6 speakers are done, and here's the chance for you guys now to ask questions of the speakers. And for the panel discussion, we're also joined by Dr. Claire Kenny. And Claire is a senior lecturer in medical education here at LKC Medicine, and she has particular interest in assessment as well. So please feel free to ask us questions for the next half an hour. The mics are in the center of your tables. Please feel free to grab the mic, press the button, perhaps identify yourself, and then ask us a question, whether directed to the panel in general, or if you want to direct a question to a particular person, please go ahead as well.
Thanks, Adrian. I have a question for Joe. Measuring professionalism, sorry, I'm Mike Ferenzi, I'm Vice Dean for Faculty Affairs in the School of Medicine. Measuring professionalism is really important and very difficult. We do sometimes pick up students where we have concerns about professionalism, but we can't get rid of them. I think it's a problem that medical schools have. How do you get rid of students for whom you have professionalism concerns? Because it could be rather low level lack of professionalism. Can you destroy their career because the evidence is low level misbehavior? How do you deal with this?
So I think that's very interesting. So actually, my talk tomorrow in the panel debate is on supporting students in difficulty. So you should come to that, where I'm going to address that side of my work. But I think actually there is 2 sides to this. So should we get rid of people with these low-level unprofessionalism? Not necessarily. So that's remediation. So I think everybody deserves a chance of remediation and some chance to improve, and would involve more support and mentoring. And I think you cannot expect one size fits all. So some students will fly through medical school without any issues at all. Some will have more difficulty and need more support. But on the other side of the coin, and that is sometimes, with my black hat on, I'm in the fitness to practice panel. I think what universities and medical schools need to accept is that not everybody that they have let into their program should actually qualify as a doctor. And And that's sometimes quite hard to take on board. And it is going to be very, very small numbers and tiny, tiny numbers. But I think there is a case where when you have applied the maximum remediation you can, and you have done everything for that student and given them the most support, that maybe sometimes that student should leave the program. And I think that's where fitness to practice comes in, and for you PCBA, for that to happen. And I think that is a growing awareness now, and certainly on the part of the General Medical Council. So in the UK, we graduate students, but we don't award them a licence. That's up to the General Medical Council. And they will then look at all the paperwork of maybe students who've had a problem and decide, well, actually, we're not happy. So I think that there is an issue now, and I feel I have two hats. So I support students, but I also have a duty to the public to ensure that the ones who shouldn't graduate don't. And that's harsh. That is harsh for people who are sometimes crushing their dreams. But I think that's an important dual role that I hold.
The rest of the panel as well, because this is, professionalism is a vexing problem to deal with when there are either students or sometimes young graduates who have professionalism issues, and when they graduate, sometimes it's even harder to take them out of practice when they're already practicing, and sometimes by then they're older, they're a little bit smarter, and they contest, and that makes things even more difficult when they contest vigorously. Thoughts from other members of the panel? Perspectives, war stories?
Yeah, we share the same perspective, really, which is we measure regularly a series of judgments, professionalism judgments, and we pick up these lots, when we identify lots of low-key ones, then we get the student in and we go to a fitness to practice process. We used to do it as an academic decision, and so we would fail to progress somebody to the next year as an academic basis. But the lawyers in the university pointed out to us that actually professionalism is not really an academic subject, and they suggested that you can't teach professionalism. May or may not be right, but anyway, we go down we have to go down the fitness to practice process, which then means that we would support the students, as Joe said, or also we'll put in other measures that the student has to do, which is often, much more frequent observations, much more frequent meetings with tutors and so forth, to make sure that they're online. And for some of these students, it's actually about educating them that, yeah, well, okay, you want to be a doctor, you probably still can be a doctor, but you need to think about what sort of doctor you're going to be, and maybe you're not going to be a great psychiatrist, or you're not going to be a great GP, but you might be really good in the path lab or something like that. But I have to say, I upset one of my colleagues who's an anaesthetist, and he said, oh, it's great, I've just been on a communication skills course. And I said, you're an anaesthetist, your patients are asleep all the time. And he said, no, Adrian, I might be the last person they speak to. So,
Hi, so Adrian Green from Imperial College, and again about professionalism with Joe. We know that there are lots of good doctors that do bad things sometimes, and all the lessons we learned from the Staffordshire inquiry was that it's a lot of it's about context, and not just the hidden curriculum, but as we know, behaviour is capability, opportunity, motivation, that those opportunities to enact the best doctor we want to be become increasingly limited in some of workplaces that we're in. What's your take on how we assess students given the pressures in the current NHS?
Yes, thank you, Kate. I mean, absolutely very hard, like that Beryl Markham thing. It's easy to be professional on a good day when you've had a lot of sleep and you've managed to get breakfast or lunch or whatever. But on a bad day when there's loads of patients in the emergency department, that's much harder. And I think we need to actually train our students to be more aware of that. And there's a lot now, the GMC are talking about dealing with complexity and uncertainty. And I think that is a way, and Adrian said, can we teach resilience? And I'm not sure about teaching it, as I'm going to lecture on resilience, but I think we can prepare our students to be more resilient, more able to deal with the NHS they're going to have to move into, to the workplace. And so deal with these issues, so when things go wrong, they feel they have greater levels of resilience, for want of a better word within them.
Well, this is going to a slightly different aspect of the same issue, if that's okay. So there's another aspect to this, the issue of professionalism, very important, as I'm sure we all agree, and that is who we let into medical school. So in the past, this was very much based on academic ability and not very much else, and certainly nothing else that had been demonstrated to be effective in terms of making the assessment of the broader characteristics of those who should be trained to become doctors. I was a member of the General Medical Council in the UK for 10 years, and one of the initiatives that was started during that time was starting to collect information from the point of entry to medical school right through into practice. Organisations like the GMC, because of a single registration number, are able to carry that through, and that evidence base is beginning to build up now to look at whether the more modern methods, whether it's a separate assessment technique that students or prospective students have to undertake, and as part of the scoring, that then is the judgment as to whether they get admitted to medical school in addition to their academic attainments. And I wondered whether any of the panel or anyone else in the room can tell us what the current evidence is in terms of that broader analysis, and whether that in fact is demonstrating that it can help us to avoid the difficult decisions that we've been discussing once these individuals become medical students or indeed doctors.
I think the answer is not so far. We try all these different methods, and we still get students coming through who it's not appropriate. In fact, it's rather sad, but one of the happiest things that happens in my work is when I can identify a student quite early and can say to them, do you think you really want to do medicine? And they say, no, actually I didn't. My parents wanted me to, or the school wanted me to, or anything. And I say, well, we can give you some credits and you can transfer across to another course if more to you like it. But the only way you can do that is to have these frequent observations to identify the student quite early, rather than waiting until they get to finals and then something.
The trouble with the UK is that we're assessing them at age 17, which is, how can anybody really know what they want to do themselves, and how can we really get a full, picture of them at that age? I think it's probably easier in America with the graduates program, and certainly when I interview graduates, I have a better sense of who they are and what they're actually bringing to the
I was going to go back to your structural equation modeling, so it's about professionalism.
As a psychologist, I'm quite skeptical about the teachability of many of these professional competencies that we are talking about, because they are not so much competencies but values, and values are deep-seated. They are very closely related to personality, and we know that personality is not easily changed. Of course, medical students are brilliant, they are bright, they can play these roles to a large extent. A non-empathetic person can play as if he can act as an empathic person. But I don't think it is a big problem. I don't think we should stress the idea that we should select students based on these characteristics, because, as Adrian said, the students are not trained all for becoming a general practitioner or a psychiatrist. There are so many jobs within the healthcare system that do not require these values, these skills to a large extent. Some of these jobs even would not, an empathic radiologist, fine, but is it necessary? I don't think so.
I hate agree with my learner colleague Henk and Adrian, but to create a bit of controversy, I think that we have to train students who we want to treat our grandparents or our parents. They have to do 1 or 2 years of general medicine in the hospital, even if they then go into pathology and never see a live patient. And I think we can't do it that way. I know medicine is a broad specialty, there are many different careers, but we have to have a pluripotential doctor who we would be happy for our parents to be treated by. That's my view.
Yeah, so that is a value statement, and you can indeed agree or disagree.
Young Postduke, I'm here at NTU. I used to be chair of the medical program at Karolinska Institute. I think an important part of professionalism is self-awareness. And I think one aspect that we are still very poor at using is actually student feedback. And I'm very aware of this from the Karolinska Institute, where we had a huge problem getting rid of students which did not show fitness for practice. And very often when these cases came up, the students said, well, you knew this all along, why haven't you got rid of it earlier? An important part of self-awareness is actually starting to think of this and giving feedback about your colleagues, in this case, or other students. This is actually a key component of team-based learning, but we're not using it as so to give anonymous feedback about the people you're working with that goes back to the students, I think is a key part of this that we need to do much more.
James Kwan, Datuk Seng Hospital emergency physician. I'm going to be a devil's advocate here and actually put forward the concept of maybe can you coach someone? Your remediation is actually coaching someone to be professional, whether they want to be professional intrinsically as part of the whole intrinsic personality, etc. There's a whole lot of intrinsic qualities that perhaps we can't measure. We're measuring behavior. So I can coach someone to behave in a certain way on the floor on a certain day, and they would do very well. And I remediate students and trainees with professionalism issues here and in my past life. So I guess my question really is that can you fake it? Can you teach them to fake it?
Yes.
Personally, for me, I guess it depends on what the professionalism gap is. So, for example, someone who's frequently not on time, that's easier to coach. Someone who's rude under pressure, it's a little bit more difficult to coach. Someone who's fundamentally, say, dishonest in presenting, say, his or her research findings, for example. And we have examples of research fraud that are frequent in the literature. The Brian Wansink case being the most recent high-profile such case. That is, I think, a little bit more difficult to coach, actually. So I guess it kind of depends on what behaviors we're trying to remediate.
I guess what I'm saying is that even though you want to select or you want to assess and you want to make sure these are professional doctors that come out of your program, you can actually temporarily coach them. You can score wonderfully in your assessment, and then they'll come out the other side and go, okay.
So the Buddhists have a saying that if you smile every day, eventually you'll be happy. So there is something to say that the coaching can work. As Nigel says, small areas such as attendance, communication. I think it's very
Here's a question from professionalism to some of the data
to the structural modelling. So I wonder if your OSCEs are checklist scores, in other words, yes, no, 1, 0, sometimes 0, 1, 2, or are they domain based? So how many domains do you have within one OSCE station?
Short answer is it varies.
So do you have more than 3 or 4 domains? Because at any point in time, there's data that the assessor can't really assess more than 3 or 4 domains. So if you end up having 5, 6, 7, 8, then it really is a checklist score, it's not a domain. If you then limited it to 2, 3, maximum 4 domains, you might find that your confirmatory factor analysis might pick up that underlying characteristic trait which you're not picking up in essentially a checklist score, which is called broad domains.
Absolutely. So I think Jerome didn't have time to present some of the data for this, but in the very first year, the first 2 years, there was some domain, some stations had up to I think 6 or 7 domains, and then we actually ran the SEM, and we found that actually the domains were read consistently. So in other words, you are double measuring certain traits which just took up assessor cognition bandwidth and really did add additional information. So based on that, then we collapsed the domains in one of the formative OSCEs of last year, ran SEM again, and then looked at the data, and again the model fit with fewer domains was much better. So we've gone with a reduced number of domains since I think this academic year, last academic year. Yeah. So your points are absolutely spot on. So we have to do that analysis to confirm what our gut feeling told us. Other questions? Yes, Sivka and Richard as well.
So we just bring the topic back to professionalism. I think it's such an important topic. I was just kind of mulling over. I'm actually looking after the psychiatric residency program, and we've had our fair share of cases with professionalism kind of issues. And one area I was kind of thinking about is what are some of the malleable factors. We can look at the non-malleable factors, but I was thinking about the malleable factors, and I wonder about the role of mentoring, having appropriate good role mentors. I think it was mentioned about hidden curriculum and so on. I think they do assert and exert quite a significant influence on the learners. And then if you ask the learners really, I think if you ask them about what are some of the factors that actually kind of influence them about feeling who they are, how do they feel as part of the fraternity and so on. Often they will mention the role of good role models, good mentors and so on. So the question is, do we actually think that putting in place enough good mentors would actually help in that process of socialization of them into the discipline, into the training, and then maintaining that over the course of their career. That kind of undergirds and also highlights the importance of good mentors, and of course the importance of not putting bad mentors into the system.
Maybe I'll ask my fellow panel members, anybody have any thoughts?
I'd like to think here at LKC Medicine, and we've followed on from Imperial's practice and having house tutor support. So every student has a personal tutor from year 1 that follows them through the 5 years, and myself and Sue Smith, who's in the audience, and others have been comparing the needs of our students, and we're kind of moving on to asking them what they want in terms of pastoral support. And one of the things that we've identified from the studies of comparing London and Singapore is that our students get the same tutor supporting them for the 5 years, and they think that that's more impactful in terms of relationship building and trust than having a clinical a science tutor early and a clinical tutor later. Then when the students hit the clinical years, from years 3 to 5, they have clinical tutors. And so in the house system we have senior tutors, often senior consultants in the hospital and scientists of different disciplines. They have people that can give them different areas of help. And as a scientist, I don't offer my duties any clinical help, but we have had difficult situations through the years where students have had to go through professional conduct hearing here. And one particular student who's being remediated, I'd say at the moment, asked if they could appoint their own non-clinical mentors. So in addition to having a prescribed tutor from day 1 and a prescribed clinical tutor from year 3, they now at the end, and hopefully we'll get through the last hurdle, have self-appointed with permission mentors that they feel comfortable with. And I'd hope that at the next Transform Med conference we can say that that's been successful. I think our students here get a lot of support on the way through. My son.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I'll try not to be unprofessional. I'm going to ask something on programmatic assessment. I quite like the idea of programmatic assessment. I'm just wondering, in terms of having multiple data, the work on assessing the students, in your opinion, what is the optimal number that we should be assessing for the entire curriculum, and what would be a good number of assessments that we should be conducting, and how would that be different, say, if we were to do a formative versus an informal kind of assessment? What are the numbers we are talking about?
Okay, so you're asking a good question. Essentially, you're asking, how do we ensure that there is little bias in the assessment and is more reliable? And traditionally, we think in terms of psychometric assessments, you know, the Cronbach alpha, the G coefficient has already been mentioned several times. This is a different paradigm, okay? So we need to step out of thinking about, I love numbers, as you can see, and I see confirmatory factor analysis light up, but we need to step out of that and think actually there are other ways. So I talked about, you know, triangulation, there is member checking, there's transparency. There are different ways of organizational procedural measures to overcome bias. So in my mind, you've got two types of bias. There's bias that is random, and increasing your sampling, having a smart sampling strategy will overcome that, and that's increasing the number of assessments. If you use real, non-standard measurements, actually you need less. So amazingly, you need a lot more stations when it's an objective structured OSCE. If you're assessing real patients, there is data that you need less of them. So in OSCE, you need 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 stations, and that's made people resort to sequential testing, for example, because you can't really run 18 stations for 400 students. So they say, let's run 6 stations, another. If you start using multiple data points of real patients, in Maastricht, I was amazed to hear the case as a 4-station OSCE. Now, that's not a 4-station because they've already accumulated lots of data points over time, if that makes sense. So it depends on your resources, and in fact, you're not going to have, you know, it would be amazing if you could have students assess 100 patients, but you need to identify the opportunities you have, capacity you have, and then say, what is it that we want to measure? So if the construct you want to measure is their ability to examine or take a history, then you need to define those opportunities and then get them to do them well, rather than make it a bureaucratic chore. So in postgraduate, we have people going for their annual review of competence progression, the ARCP, and the night before they're sending me all their case-based discussions to sign off. You know, there's a flood of CVDs coming the night before. That's not what it was meant to be designed for. It was meant to be a regular, frequent thing, and now it's turned into a thing that happens 24 hours before your ARCP.
So how do you prevent that happening at undergraduate level then? Because I think we all agree that this constant monitoring is the ideal. We have lots of eyes on it. But how do we ensure that happens in a reliable way? And also, how do we make it reliable to our stakeholders, acceptable to stakeholders? Because both students and patients kind of like the idea of doctors who passed exams.
They are still passing exams because you're examining and assessing the students. So when my firm students start, when my students start, on my firm, we used to practice medicine in a way that I was on a firm with Hugh Bainan. I had Mini Kumar Clark in my pocket. He knew me all along. And there was a consultant, a registrar, an SHO house officer. We all knew each other. Now there is a physician of the day, physician of the week. The junior doctor's changing all the time. Nobody has a clear picture. So the end of 10 weeks, and they're presented by an iPad that says, is this student fit to progress? And almost invariably people say yes, because you just don't know. Now, I'm increasingly agreeing with my students at the beginning of the term. How many patients do you think it is feasible for you to see? And they said, I don't know. I said, do you think one patient a day is fine? They go, one patient a day? Yeah, that's fine. So by Friday, they need to show me 5 Clark. If they suddenly say, wow, that's a lot. 5, nobody else is doing that. So it's basically defining, agreeing with your students, setting goals which are feasible, which are achievable, 1 patient a day, 1 patient every other day, whatever it is, and actually spending the time. So then I go to the bedside, I observe the student, I give them feedback, I expect them to present. Next time, they need to have worked on the aspects that there was, and that's actually assessment, rather than doing nothing for 10 weeks and then, 2 weeks before the OSCE, Reynolds Building is full of students practicing on each other, giving instructions on how to do endoscopy, bronchoscopy. They've never seen an endoscopy, bronchoscopy, but they're giving a perfect set of memorized lists of instructions on things they've never observed. So as a patient, I'd be much more reassured if my student actually seen stuff and rehearsed them in real clinical settings than actually practice and rehearse for an exam. What do we do for exams? Revise, do the exam, forget.
As a doctor, do you have enough time? As a doctor, do you have enough time to do that for all your students? Because that's the other side of the coin. That is caring, nurturing, supportive, and exactly what we would like our teachers to be. But do you have time to deliver that way? You're also trying to be caring, supportive, reliable, and for your patients as well, because that's a huge resource demand of human input there. You've really got to take time and trouble with the students. It's very, very labour intensive. So
I think it's
ideal, but can be difficult.
I mean, I always think if I can do it, I have multiple different jobs. If I can still identify the time to observe a student every week.
You only sleep 2 hours a night.
There was a question from this.
So thank you very much indeed. Really fascinating discussion. I think one could go on for a long time. Just want to go back to the sort of resilience and the professionalism. Now, clearly there's several points where you could do something about. One is actually the admissions, but I don't know how you can predict what's going to happen to them because they're 17. The girls are better than the boys. We've got now more women anyway. And the problem really now for me is that the women often aren't as resilient as they'd like to be because they've been pushed by their medical school, by their schools to go to apply to medical school. Having then got in, and I chaired the Professional Capability Committee, which is really looking at the people who sort of fall off. I had great problems. You can't get rid of them, as you said. But one problem that I have, which is very difficult, is the mental health side of it. Because a lot of people do go down with depression, anxiety, and so on, which in a way we've designed our medical schools to sort of make sure they do get anxious and exam all the way down. Now you cannot. In two ways, you want them there, but on the other hand, you want to be kind to them and say, look, you really should leave. But they won't leave because if you suggest that, they get the ombudsman, they get the uncles and aunts, the grannies saying they've had problems, and it's impossible. And I've had several cases where it's wrong for the poor person, the pressure's on them. How do you say, look, nicely, please go, because you can't, as you say, you can give them a few points and credits and so on for the class we are, but however nice you are, the worse it gets. So the question really is, how do you cope with that problem? And you also said something, Joe, which is absolutely right. I'm looking at the patients in the future, not only at the doctor itself, but the patients. And if somebody's going to go and not be able to resume themselves to it, and behaviour problems, are they going to kill it?
So you're absolutely right. So mental health, a hugely increasing problem, I think, at all medical schools when we go to meetings around the country. I think students are finally feeling less stigmatised and are admitting to mental health problems, but I think it's more common as well. And how do we deal with it? Well, we deal with all the support systems we have very similar, as Claire mentioned, and a lot of students will be encouraged to take some time out. So we have a number of students on interruptions. So mental health is not you are mentally unwell and therefore shouldn't be a doctor, but you need to go and get well and then come back when you are well and then continue your studies. So I think that's often the message. In my time at Imperial, there's maybe been 1 or 2 students who have had a mental health problem that was untreatable. who've had to leave. So I think while there are vast amounts of people with mental health issues, I think most of them are treatable through support, through their doctors, and they need to take that time out and then come back. And we are doing that much more frequently now. So I think that's one way.
This particular person, I remember, was out over 5 years, came back. So obviously you do that, so to go away, get better, and they will support you and come back again. How many times can you do that? And they will still come back. And I think one, I said, but somebody should have said no, because I think there was a rule about 5 years or something. But I had one who was 6 years out, and it's a waste of public money because that's what it was all about. So you comment.
And I think it comes back to the point made by several speakers about expert judgment. In the same way that we have a patient with terminal illness, how many times would you want to admit before you say, this is the end of the road, right? In the same way, we have to try to remediate our students, but at some point in time, sometimes we have to say, I think beyond this point, it's going to be very difficult. We need to have a conversation about thinking about alternative careers, for example. So I think it comes back to expert judgment, and I think it's something which we all hone through experience and again through conversations and discussions such as this one. So it is 12:46, so I have to bring today's discussion to a close, but it was a fascinating discussion. Can we just have a round of applause for all our speakers?